In 1947, the United States transferred control of atomic research from the U.S. Army to civilian authority under the newly created Atomic Energy Commission (AEC) in October 1946. In advance of the commission actually coming into being, Strauss was named by President Truman as one of the first 5 commissioners. With David A. Lilienthal as the chairman, Strauss had been recommended for a position on the body by Vice Admiral Paul Frederick Foster, a longtime friend for whom Strauss had earlier provided contacts in the business world, and who had subsequently helped Strauss get his active duty assignment. In their initial discussion about the appointment, Strauss noted to the New Deal supporting Truman that, "I am a black Hoover Republican." Truman said that was of no matter, since the commission was intended to be non-political. Strauss, who had briefly returned to work at Kuhn Loeb after the war, now excited the firm altogether in order to comply with AEC regulations. Once there, Strauss became one of the first commissioners to speak in dissent from existing policy. In the first 2 years there were a dozen instances, most having to do with information security matters, in which Strauss was in a 1-4 minority on the commission. In the process he was increasingly perceived as stubborn. One of Strauss's first actions on the AEC was to urge his fellow commissioners to set up the capability to monitor foreign atomic activity via atmospheric testing. In particular, he saw that WB-29 Superfortress aircraft equipped with radiological tests could run regular sniffer flights to monitor the upper atmosphere to detect any atomic tests by the Soviet Union. Other people in government and science, including physicists J. Robert Oppenheimer and Edward Teller, argued that the radiological approach would not work. But Strauss and the newly formed United States Air Force continued on regardless. Several days after the first atomic bomb test by the Soviet Union in August 1949, a WB-29 flight did in fact find evidence of the test, while Strauss was not the only person who had been urging long-range detection capabilities. It was largely due to his efforts that the United States was able to discover that the Soviet Union had become a nuclear power. Strauss believed in a fundamental premise of the Cold War, that the Soviet Union was determined on a course of world domination. As such, he believed in having a more powerful nuclear force than the Soviets and in maintaining secrecy about U.S. nuclear activities. This extended to allies. Among the commissioners, he was the most skeptical about the value of the modus vivendi that was agreed to in January 1948. That provided for limited sharing of technical information between the United States, Britain, and Canada, and that was already a stricter set of guidelines than those established by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the Quebec Agreement of the Manhattan Project era. During the United States presidential election, 1948, Strauss tried to convince Republican Party nominee Thomas A. Dewey about the dangers of sharing atomic information with Britain. And after Dewey lost, Strauss tried to convince Truman of the same. Following the revelations about the British physicist Klaus Fuchs's espionage for the Soviet Union, and the appointment of the former Marxist John Strachey as Secretary of State for War in the British cabinet, Strauss argued that the modus vivendi should be suspended completely. But no other commissioners wanted to go to that extreme. Strauss was known for his psychological rigidity. One of his fellow commissioners reportedly said, "If you disagree with Lewis about anything, he assumes you're just a fool at first, but if you go on disagreeing with him, he concludes you must be a traitor." Strauss was increasingly unhappy in his position. But President Truman indicated satisfaction with Strauss's work and the minority stances he was taking on the commission. The first atomic bomb test by the Soviet Union in August 1949 came earlier than expected by Americans, and over the next several months there was an intense debate within the U.S. government, military, and scientific communities regarding whether to proceed with development of the far more powerful hydrogen bomb, then known as the super. Strauss urged for the United States to move immediately to develop it, writing to his fellow commissioners on October 5 that the time has come for a quantum jump in our planning. We should make an intensive effort to get ahead with the super. In particular, Strauss was unswayed by moral arguments against going forward, seeing no real difference between using it in the atomic bomb or the boosted fission weapon that some opponents of the super were advocating as an alternative. When Strauss was rebuffed by the other commissioners, he went to National Security Council Executive Secretary Sidney Suez in order to bring the matter to President Truman directly. It was as a consequence of this meeting that Truman first learned, when Suez informed him that such a thing as a hydrogen bomb could exist in a memorandum urging development of the super. He sent to President Truman on November 25, 1949. The pious Strauss expressed no doubt about what the Soviets would do, writing that a government of atheists is not likely to be dissuaded from producing the weapon on moral grounds. On January 31, 1950, Truman announced his decision to go forward with hydrogen bomb development. A few narratives, including ones promoted by Strauss and that of Strauss' biographer, have placed Strauss as having had a central role in Truman's decision. But by the time the decision was made, Strauss was one of an increasingly large coalition of military and government figures, and a few scientists, who strongly felt that development of the new weapon was essential to U.S. security in the face of a hostile, nuclear-capable, ideological enemy. Thus, in the absence of Strauss' action, the same decision would almost surely have been reached. In any case, when the decision was announced, Strauss, considering that he had accomplished as much as he could, submitted his resignation the same day. Within the administration there was some consideration given to Strauss being named chairman of the AEC to replace the departing Lilienthal. But Strauss was considered too polarizing a figure. The last day for Strauss during this first stint of his on the commission was April 15, 1950.